2. Sibongile's advice. The next day, Dan was up early because a clinical officer had called to say there was an emergency at the hospital. Within minutes a car came to fetch the young doctor, the driver yawning every time he changed the gears as if to say, "I'm fed up with this job." Left alone, Julia took her time to rise from the bed. It was as if she didn't want to face the world, it was as if the entire world had conspired to pounce on her if she decided to get up. She closed her eyes, hoping that everything was just a nightmare which would disappear if she opened her eyes again. At about 9, the phone rang. "Hello. Hi, Ju." A voice with a smirk in it spoke at the other end. Then the line went dead again. Slowly, Julia replaced the receiver, her hand damp with sweat. "So you've managed to find out where I live, Alphonse?" That was quick. Too quick. "But what do you want? Why do you want to torment me? Why don't you leave me alone, for memory's sake? Why should you behave like a hawk at the sight of a defenseless chick?" She didn't have any breakfast, she couldn't. She just sat at the table, her hands to her jaws, the elbows planted on the table, thinking about the man from the past. 12 years had suddenly become 12 minutes. It was as if someone had torn off some chapters in her book of life, drawing her back to an earlier chapter 12 years ago. Then in a flash, as if from the wall she had been staring at vacantly, a scene from her days in Zimbabwe appeared to her mind's eye. It had been late at night when she heard the voices. She rose from the bed and tiptoed out of the bedroom towards the sitting room where the door was half open. "It's your fault," her mother was saying. "Do you know what you are saying?" her father thundered. Either he was drunk or angry. If he was both, that spelled trouble. Normally he was a friendly, reserved individual. His outspokenness came out only when he was drunk. And he wasn't a regular drinker anyway. "You want me to repeat myself? I said your daughter is pregnant." "You hear, pregnant? You don't know what you're saying, woman. I'm telling you, she's pregnant." "Oh, the shame. We'll be the laughing stock of the entire township." "It's your fault." "Whose fault? What fault? You brought her up the wrong way." "Who should be saying that, you or me?" "The shame. I've never seen a father who was so lenient with his daughters. When I was a kid, my papa used to whip me with his belt until we bled." "Children are not slaves, mind you," her father pointed out, lighting a cigarette. "Oh, the shame," lamented her mother. "People will laugh at us for years to come. You don't bring up kids by following radio programs. And you don't bring up kids by shouting at your husband late at night as if we were rabid hyenas," retorted the man. "Who knows, she might be listening to our..." "Lower your voice. You want to wake her up? Watch out, Nyafoka. I'm a man and women don't shout in my face. I'll shout if I want to." "Call her here then." "Call who?" "Julia. Call her here and let's hear you say to her what you've been telling me. Let's hear you accuse her of..." "Of what? Didn't you say she was pregnant?" "Of course." "Then bring her here. Let's see what she has to say. You might be seeing things which are not there." "Leave me alone," Julia yelled from where she had been listening to every word. Julia was brought back to the present when her houseboy rushed to the breakfast table, a puzzled expression on his face. "Did the madam call me?" Alone asked, squatting at a respectable distance. "No." Julia replied awkwardly, slightly startled by the realization that she must have said something aloud. Good God. It was difficult though not to think about Alphonse in relation to the past. But trying to bring back the past was painful to her, for the past threatened to destroy her future. A dead volcano was threatening to rise again. She had a quick bath. After that she wrote a brief note which she left on the bed, telling Dan that she was off to her sister's place in Kanjedza. She'd be back as soon as possible. Then she jumped into the Datsun coupe and drove off, her mind still in turmoil. Julia's elder sister lived in Kanjedza. Her house had 2 bedrooms but no ceiling, no veranda, no garage. Separating this house from the next was a brick wall which was so thin that you could hear your next-door neighbor snoring. Single ladies didn't like such houses, for the next day they would get the question, "We heard a deep voice last night in your house. Whose was it?" Julia parked the car outside, close to the curb. She found her sister washing clothes at the back of the house. "My, you look as if you've been sleepwalking, Julia," remarked Sibongile, rising from the stool, her face puzzled. Just then Tendai, a girl of about 11 or 12, came rushing to Julia, her face all smiles. "Sis! I saw your car," she shouted breathlessly. "Where?" Julia asked, holding her by the shoulder. "We were coming from Sunday school. And I saw it. So I ran. I really ran." Fine, fine. But how are you, Tendai?" "Okay," replied the young girl, her eyes dancing with excitement. Julia bent over and kissed her lightly on the cheek. Then, pulling out a 1-kwacha note, she told her to go and buy herself an ice cream. "Oh, sis, thanks," whooped Tendai, darting off to look for an ice cream tricycle. Every time the tricycle came within sight, worried mothers would dash into the bedroom and make sure their loose change was under lock and key, otherwise they would see their children running after the tricycle, flashing money. Sibongile rubbed her wet hands against the sides of her dress and followed her younger sister into the house. "Is anything the matter, Julia?" Sibongile asked the moment they sat down. She knew her sister better. Instead of answering, Julia glanced around the room at the pictures hanging on the walls. There was a family photo with Ma and Papa standing behind their 2 children who were seated on a form long enough for the entire family to sit on. There was a photo of Sibongile, looking young, cheerful and energetic. This photo had been taken in the days when she had been married to a local businessman whom she had since divorced. She had sworn never to get married again, for, as far as she was concerned, marriage was for the unfortunate. "No independent mind stays married for long," she would say whenever anybody raised the marriage issue. "What's wrong, Julia?" Sibongile asked again. "Alphonse," came the answer. "I saw Alphonse." "Alphonse? It can't be," muttered Sibongile, hoping Julia was talking of a look-alike. "It's true, Sibo," went on Julia, a lump in her throat. "I saw him with my own eyes yesterday." Sibongile listened as her younger sister recounted the way she had met Alphonse outside the cinema. "My, I don't believe a word," began Sibongile, shaking her head. "He rang this morning, said a few words and rang off." "But, Julia, Alphonse is dead. Remember that day we met a friend of his in Zambia? Shea, wasn't it?" Julia did remember. She could vividly remember the day she and her family had been traveling back to Malawi via Zambia. Their father had just retired. Now the scene unfolded itself clearly as she sat staring at her elder sister. It had been some years back and they had been waiting for a bus at the Lusaka terminal to take them to Malawi when Sibongile noticed a familiar figure limping by. "My, I think I know that guy," she said, staring at the man who was wearing an oversized coat, the kind of coat a beggar gets from a tourist who overrates the African winter. The tourist is told it can be pretty cold down there, and so he brings with him one of those thick coats, only to find out that in most parts of southern Africa, the winter is quite mild. Julia almost said, "That's Shea." But she noticed that the man had 1 arm and that he limped. It couldn't be Shea, for he had 2 arms and had walked without a limp. "My, that's Shea," yelled Sibongile, and, before anybody could stop her, she ran after him. Intrigued, Julia followed suit. When both Sibongile and Julia caught up with him, the man turned and looked at them. His eyes were expressionless, they held no warmth. His face was roughed up as if he had spent most of his life being a bouncer in a bar. "Shea," Sibongile said with a smile. A sad smile. "Go your way, girls," the old young man said and started walking away. His voice was still young though. Julia found herself asking, "Is Alphonse with you?" The man who had gone to jail with Alphonse answered with the question, "Isn't he dead?" and limped away quickly. Now years later, the 2 sisters were reliving the day they had met Shea in Zambia. "I saw Alphonse," Julia said again, coming back to the present. There was silence in the room as Sibongile thought about the statement she had just heard. I saw Alphonse. What is he after then? She asked finally, imagining him threatening Julia with a long sword and an even longer spear. Don't know. That's why I came to you. What can he be after? Don't know. But Julia realized that neither of them wanted to face reality. Probably what Alphonse was after was quite obvious. We were kids, Alphonse, but our adult games left me carrying your child. You went to prison just before I realized I was pregnant, Alphonse. Now, have you come to claim back your child? Have you come back to claim me, or have you come to claim both of us, after all these years? You see, Alphonse, I am married to a young doctor called Dan. I love him, we love each other. There's no room for you because you belong to the past. A forgotten past. I was too young to know what love was, Alphonse. With you I was just reacting against my mother. I wanted her to accept the fact that I was a grown-up too. But with Dan, it's love. Real love. Why did you come back, Alphonse? You see, Alphonse, my husband doesn't know about you. About us. He doesn't know you made me pregnant when I was barely 13, way back in Zimbabwe. Can you see, Alphonse, what would happen if he knew I wasn't as pure as he had been led to believe? Wouldn't he think I'd been fooling him all along? What would happen to me, Alphonse? You wouldn't expect me to marry you, would you? Go away, Alphonse, and stay away. Leave me alone. What can he be after? Sibongile repeated the question. Don't know. He doesn't know anything, does he? Julia sat up. What do you mean? I mean, does he know he made you a mother when you were 13, back there in Harare? It took ages before Julia answered that question. In her mind's eye, she saw her mother pointing an accusing finger at her. I'm sorry, Ma. I didn't know adult games hurt you. You were to blame, too, for not telling me point blank that if I slept with a boy, he'd probably make me pregnant. You just used to shout at me, saying, I don't want to hear of you making a fool of yourself with any boy in the neighborhood. If I hear anything, I'll beat you up until you bleed. I don't want you to be misled. Look at me. I'm a respectably married woman. You know why? Because my father made sure I was never misled by any boy. But Ma, at 13, did you expect me to understand that? You used to hide all human biology textbooks from me. Ma, did you expect me to understand that adult games hurt? But I'm sorry, Ma. Julia. Sibongile cut short Julia's line of thoughts. Don't cry. I'm not. Your eyes are wet. Julia blinked twice, realizing that tears had been accumulating in her eyes. Everything will be okay, Sibongile went on soothingly. We just have to sit still until Alphonse approaches you. Then find out what he wants. For all we know, he may not even be aware that when he was thrown in jail in Mufikos, you were expecting his child. After all, you were so young, weren't you? That was soothing. Julia could detect a ray of hope in front of her. Maybe the situation wasn't as delicate as she had thought. Maybe Alphonse had no idea about the fact that he was the father to her child. Come to think of it, how many people around here knew what had happened to her when she was 13? That chapter did not exist in her life. What had happened 12 years ago was a guarded secret known only to a few members of Julia's family. A family secret. It was such a well-kept secret that over the years Julia herself had come to believe that there was nothing which could make the secret come into the open.